My husband stood at the podium of his promotion celebration, gestured toward his secretary, and called her the smart one, while I stood 3 feet away holding a glass of champagne. 2 hours later, the CEO took the microphone and said my name, revealing a truth my husband never saw coming. This is the story of how being invisible became my greatest advantage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Hartfield Hotel ballroom glittered with the kind of manufactured elegance that corporations deploy when celebrating their rising stars. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables draped in ivory linen. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that cost more per bite than most people spend on entire meals. Approximately 200 people had gathered to celebrate the promotion of 6 executives at Quantum Dynamics, the aerospace engineering firm where my husband Marcus had worked for the past 9 years. I stood near the bar wearing a navy dress I had purchased specifically for this occasion, watching Marcus network with colleagues and superiors with the practiced ease of someone who had spent nearly a decade cultivating these professional relationships. He moved through the crowd with confidence that bordered on swagger, his hand frequently touching the small of his secretary's back as he guided her from conversation to conversation, introducing her to people whose names I recognized from years of hearing about office politics over dinner. Vanessa Chun was 28 years old, 7 years younger than me, with the kind of sleek professional polish that came from devoting full attention to career advancement without the competing demands of managing a household or supporting a spouse's ambitions. Her dress was designer, her jewelry understated but clearly expensive, her makeup applied with precision that suggested either professional assistance or years of practice. She was beautiful in the way that professional women in corporate environments often are. Attractive enough to be noticed but not so overtly sexual as to be dismissed as unprofessional. Marcus had been talking about Vanessa for the past 18 months with increasing frequency and enthusiasm. She had been hired as his executive assistant after his previous secretary had retired. And according to Marcus, Vanessa was extraordinarily competent. She anticipated his needs before he articulated them. She managed his calendar with strategic precision. She had connections throughout the company that made her invaluable for navigating corporate politics. She was, he frequently said, the best hire he had ever made. I had met Vanessa twice before this evening. Once when I had stopped by Marcus's office to drop off documents he had forgotten at home, and once at a previous company event where we had exchanged polite small talk for approximately 5 minutes before Marcus had pulled her away for an introduction he deemed more important. Both interactions had been pleasant but perfunctory, marked by the kind of professional courtesy that acknowledged our connection through Marcus while maintaining clear boundaries about our separate spheres. The promotion ceremony itself had followed predictable corporate ritual. The CEO, Robert Kendrick, a man in his early 60s with silver hair, and the kind of authoritative presence that comes from decades of commanding rooms, had welcomed everyone and spoken about Quantum Dynamics' record-breaking year. The CFO had presented financial highlights demonstrating the company's growth trajectory. Then Kendrick had begun announcing the promotions, each one accompanied by brief remarks about the executive's contributions and future responsibilities. Marcus's promotion had been 4th on the list. He was moving from Director of Operations to Vice President of Strategic Development, a position that came with significant salary increase, expanded authority, and a seat in executive-level decision-making meetings. When his name was called, the room had erupted in applause. Marcus had walked to the podium with the confident stride of someone who had been expecting this recognition, who had been preparing for this moment throughout his entire career. His acceptance speech had been polished and strategic, clearly rehearsed but delivered with enough spontaneity to seem genuine. He had thanked Robert Kendrick and the executive team for their confidence in his abilities. He had acknowledged his department colleagues for their collaboration and dedication. He had spoken about Quantum Dynamics' mission, and his excitement about contributing to the company's continued innovation in aerospace technology. Then he had gestured toward where Vanessa stood near the front of the crowd, and said words that would replay in my mind for hours afterward. I have to give special recognition to Vanessa Chun, my executive assistant. She's the smart one who keeps everything running smoothly. I honestly couldn't do what I do without her organizational genius and strategic thinking. The room had responded with knowing laughter and additional applause. Several people had turned to smile at Vanessa, who had accepted the recognition with gracious modesty, placing her hand over her heart in a gesture of humble appreciation. Marcus had grinned, pleased with himself for acknowledging his assistant publicly, demonstrating the kind of leadership that recognized team contributions rather than claiming all credit individually. I had stood 3 feet from where Vanessa received this recognition, holding my champagne glass, smiling automatically the way spouses do at these events, feeling something cold and heavy settle in my chest. Marcus had not mentioned me, had not acknowledged the role I had played in making this promotion possible, had not gestured toward where I stood and recognized my contributions to his career over the past decade. Instead, he had called his 28-year-old secretary the smart one, while I remained invisible, decorative, present but apparently not worth mentioning despite everything I had done to support his climb up the corporate ladder. The phrase itself was particularly cutting. Not "she's so smart," or "she's incredibly intelligent," but "the smart one." Definite article. Singular designation. As though intelligence was a limited resource that could be assigned to only one person in his professional orbit, and he had determined that person was his secretary rather than his wife. 10 years earlier, I had been the smart one in our relationship. We had met during graduate school at Columbia University, both pursuing master's degrees in engineering. Marcus had been studying mechanical engineering with a focus on aerospace applications. I had been completing a dual degree in electrical engineering and business administration, a punishing program that required managing coursework from 2 separate schools simultaneously. Our relationship had developed gradually through study groups and late-night sessions in the engineering library. Marcus had been charming and ambitious, openly admiring what he called my intellectual firepower. He had pursued me persistently, showing up at my study spots with coffee, volunteering to help with problem sets even though electrical engineering was outside his primary field, making it clear that he found my competence attractive rather than threatening. When we had graduated, we had both received multiple job offers. Marcus had accepted a position at Quantum Dynamics, a mid-sized aerospace firm with solid reputation but limited growth trajectory at that time. I had received an offer from Tesla, a company on the verge of revolutionary expansion, offering a role in their electric vehicle division with significant growth potential and competitive compensation. But Marcus's position had been in Chicago, where his family was located, and where he felt professionally comfortable. My offer had been in California, requiring relocation away from everyone we knew. When Marcus had proposed marriage 3 months after graduation, the unspoken understanding was that I would find work in Chicago rather than pursuing the California opportunity, that I would prioritize our relationship over my individual career trajectory, that being together mattered more than optimizing my professional prospects. I had told myself this was a reasonable compromise, that relationships required sacrifice from both partners, that I could build a meaningful career in Chicago even if it meant declining the Tesla opportunity. I had accepted a position at a small engineering consulting firm, doing solid work that utilized my technical skills without offering the scale or innovation potential that a company like Tesla represented. Then I had gotten pregnant with our daughter Emma 18 months into our marriage. The pregnancy had been unplanned but welcome, both of us agreeing that starting a family was something we wanted even if the timing was not ideal. When Emma had been born, we had made decisions about childcare and career priorities that had seemed practical and equitable at the time, but had accumulated into a pattern that shaped our lives for the next decade. Marcus's career trajectory at Quantum Dynamics had been progressing steadily. My consulting firm work had been flexible but demanding, with unpredictable hours and frequent travel that became increasingly difficult to manage with an infant at home. When Emma was 6 months old and I was facing a project assignment that would require 2 weeks in Denver, Marcus and I had discussed our options. The decision we reached was framed as temporary and practical. I would take a step back from my consulting work, perhaps exploring part-time or contract opportunities that offered more flexibility, until Emma was older and childcare logistics were less complicated. Marcus's career was at a crucial development stage where demonstrating commitment and availability could significantly impact his advancement potential. It made sense for him to be the primary focus while I provided support at home. Temporary had become permanent in the way these arrangements often do. I had taken contract work sporadically, small projects that kept my technical skills current without demanding the time commitment of full-time employment. When our son James had been born 3 years after Emma, the practical logic of my staying home had become even more compelling. 2 children required more logistical management than one. Marcus's career continued advancing, his salary increasing to the point where my consulting income represented a relatively small percentage of our household finances. By the time both children were in school full-time, I had been out of traditional engineering work for nearly 8 years. The industry had evolved significantly during that period. Technologies I had studied in graduate school had been superseded by newer innovations. Professional networks I had cultivated early in my career had atrophied through years of limited engagement. The prospect of re-entering the field at a competitive level felt increasingly daunting. Instead, I had focused my considerable analytical and strategic capabilities on managing our household with the same systematic rigor I had once applied to engineering problems. I had optimized our family's schedules, managed finances with precision that maximized savings and investment returns, researched school options and made strategic decisions about our children's education, maintained the social and logistical infrastructure that allowed Marcus to focus entirely on his career without being distracted by domestic responsibilities. I had also functioned as his unofficial career advisor, the role I had played since graduate school when I had helped him prepare for technical interviews and strategize about professional positioning. Every major decision Marcus had made at Quantum Dynamics had been discussed extensively with me first. Every office political situation had been analyzed from multiple angles during evening conversations. Every strategic move had been refined through dialogue with someone who understood both the technical dimensions and the business implications of his work. When Marcus had been considering whether to accept a lateral move that would position him for future advancement, I had created detailed analyses of the potential benefits and risks, modeling different scenarios and their likely outcomes. When he had been navigating a difficult relationship with a previous supervisor, I had helped him develop communication strategies that ultimately resolved the conflict and strengthened his reputation. When he had been preparing for the interview process for his director-level promotion 3 years ago, I had conducted mock interviews, provided feedback on his presentation materials, and helped him articulate his value proposition in terms that resonated with executive leadership priorities. My contributions had been substantial and strategic. They had also been completely invisible to everyone at Quantum Dynamics except Marcus. I had no title, no official role, no recognition in his professional success beyond the occasional generic acknowledgement that he appreciated his family's support. Standing in the Hartfield Hotel ballroom watching my husband publicly praise his secretary as the smart one, I felt the accumulated weight of a decade of invisible contributions crystallize into a moment of painful clarity. I had been supporting his career with the same intelligence and strategic thinking he was now attributing entirely to Vanessa. The difference was that Vanessa received recognition, professional advancement, presumably increasing compensation, and public acknowledgement of her capabilities. I received silence and erasure, my contributions absorbed into Marcus's professional identity, without leaving any trace of their actual source. The ceremony continued with 2 more promotions being announced. I stood in my designated position near the bar, maintaining the appropriate spouse smile, responding to occasional comments from people I barely knew with polite engagement that required none of my actual attention. My mind was occupied with uncomfortable questions about choices I had made, sacrifices I had accepted, and a pattern of diminishment I had been participating in without fully acknowledging its cumulative impact. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When the formal ceremony concluded, the event shifted into networking and socializing mode. Marcus remained near the front of the room, surrounded by colleagues offering congratulations, and engaging in the kind of strategic conversation that advanced professional relationships. Vanessa stayed close to his side, her role apparently extending beyond office hours into social events where her presence continued to be valued and acknowledged. I wandered toward the windows overlooking Michigan Avenue, putting distance between myself and the celebration I was ostensibly part of but felt increasingly disconnected from. The Chicago skyline stretched north and south, millions of lights marking buildings where people were working, living, pursuing ambitions that might or might not pan out according to their hopes. "You must be incredibly proud." The voice came from beside me, A woman approximately my age wearing a burgundy dress and holding a glass of white wine. I recognized her vaguely from previous company events but could not recall her name or role. Of course, I said automatically, deploying the appropriate response. It's wonderful to see his hard work recognized. How long have you been married? 10 years this November. The early career years are the hardest, the woman said, her tone carrying the authority of personal experience. So much sacrifice required from both partners. But it pays off eventually, as you're seeing tonight. My husband went through similar promotions, and I can tell you that the executive level is when things finally stabilize. More predictable hours, better work-life balance, compensation that actually reflects the years of effort. I nodded politely, recognizing the narrative she was offering. A story in which current sacrifice would be rewarded by future stability, in which supporting a spouse's career advancement would eventually benefit the entire family, in which patience and dedication would be vindicated by improved circumstances that made the difficult years worthwhile. It was a narrative I had been telling myself for the past decade. But watching Marcus publicly praise his secretary, while failing to acknowledge my contributions, had cracked something in that story's foundation. I was no longer certain that patience and dedication would be vindicated. I was no longer convinced that his success would translate into meaningful recognition of my role in creating that success. I was starting to question whether the pattern we had established would ever actually change or whether I had simply accepted diminishment as the price of maintaining our family structure. The woman continued talking about her own experiences with her husband's career advancement, offering advice about navigating executive social circles and maintaining couple identity while supporting demanding professional roles. I made appropriate sounds of agreement and interest while barely processing her actual words. My attention was divided between the conversation I was performing and the realizations that kept surfacing in my consciousness like items bobbing to the surface of water after being submerged too long. The event continued for another 90 minutes. I consumed 2 more glasses of champagne, engaged in approximately a dozen brief conversations with people whose names I would not remember by morning, and maintained my position in the performance of supportive corporate spouse while feeling progressively more alienated from the role I was playing. Marcus eventually made his way across the room to where I stood, his face flushed with alcohol and success, his energy elevated by the evening's recognition. Great event, right? I think my speech went well. Kendrick seemed pleased with how I acknowledged the team contributions. Very important to demonstrate that kind of leadership awareness at this level. You acknowledged Vanessa very specifically, I said, keeping my tone neutral and observational rather than accusatory. Well, she deserves it. She's been instrumental in managing the workload and strategic coordination this past year. I wanted to make sure she knew her contributions were valued. Good assistants are rare, and I don't want her getting poached by other executives who might offer better opportunities. Of course, I said. Recognizing valuable contributions is important. He was already scanning the room, identifying other conversations he wanted to engage in before the event concluded. I should talk to Henderson from Strategic Initiatives before he leaves. Network while the energy is high. Can you be ready to leave in about 30 minutes? I'll be here, I said, which was literally true and metaphorically accurate in ways I was only beginning to understand. Marcus moved away, gravitating back toward clusters of colleagues and superiors, his attention entirely focused on professional relationship cultivation that would support his continued advancement. I remained near the windows, watching the city and feeling the distance between my actual capabilities and my current role expand into something I could no longer comfortably ignore. I did not know yet what would happen in the next 2 hours that would completely transform both my understanding of my situation and Marcus's perception of who I actually was. I did not know that the evening's real turning point had not been Marcus's promotion announcement but was still approaching, waiting to reveal truths that had been carefully hidden for reasons I was only beginning to comprehend. All I knew in that moment was that something had broken. Some acceptance of diminishment that I had been maintaining through force of will and narrative rationalization had finally cracked under the weight of being publicly erased, while my husband praised someone else as the smart one. The breaking was painful, but it was also, I would later understand, absolutely necessary. Some transformations require destruction of previous structures before new possibilities can emerge. Some recognitions require the collapse of comfortable stories before honest assessment becomes possible. I was standing at the beginning of that collapse, still performing my assigned role, not yet aware of what was coming but already feeling the foundation shift beneath carefully maintained appearances. The evening was far from over, and the real story was about to begin. The evening had begun to wind down when Robert Kendrick, Quantum Dynamics CEO, returned to the podium. Most guests had assumed the formal programming had concluded, and the room buzzed with the relaxed conversation that follows ceremonial obligations. People were beginning to gather coats and exchange final pleasantries, preparing for departures that would scatter them back to their respective corners of the Chicago metropolitan area. Kendrick tapped the microphone twice, the sound cutting through the ambient noise with enough authority to recapture attention. The conversations diminished gradually, people turning back toward the podium with mild curiosity about what additional remarks might be forthcoming. Marcus, who had been deep in conversation with the vice president of finance near the bar, straightened his posture and adjusted his tie, his expression shifting into the attentive engagement appropriate for someone who had just been promoted and needed to demonstrate continued professional focus. "I apologize for interrupting the socializing," Kendrick said, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. "But before everyone disperses, I want to take a few minutes to discuss something that has particular relevance to this evening's celebration, specifically to Marcus Chen's promotion to Vice President of Strategic Development." I felt my attention sharpen despite the champagne-induced softness at the edges of my perception. Something in Kendrick's tone suggested this was not merely additional ceremonial remarks. There was purpose here, direction, and agenda that had not been revealed in the earlier programming. Marcus's expression showed pleased anticipation. Additional recognition from the CEO, delivered after the formal ceremony had concluded, would be interpreted by everyone present as particularly meaningful, spontaneous rather than scripted, genuine rather than obligatory, the kind of endorsement that carried substantial weight in corporate environments where sincerity was rare, and therefore valuable when it appeared. Marcus's promotion is well-deserved based on his performance and leadership over the past several years, Kendrick continued, his gaze moving across the room in a way that included everyone while focusing on no one specifically. But his success, and frankly the success of several executives in this room, has been significantly enhanced by contributions that typically remain invisible in corporate settings. The room had gone completely silent now, the quality of attention shifting from polite to genuinely engaged. People were trying to determine where Kendrick was heading with this unexpected addition to the evening's program. 6 years ago, quantum dynamics was facing a critical challenge, Kendrick said, his tone becoming more serious, more weighted with importance. We had developed proprietary technology for lightweight composite materials that could revolutionize aerospace applications. But we were struggling to translate that technical innovation into manufacturing processes that could scale commercially. We needed someone with deep expertise in both electrical engineering and business operations, someone who understood the technical challenges and could also structure the business framework for successful commercialization. I felt something shift in my chest, a recognition beginning to form before my conscious mind fully caught up to what was being said. The timeline Kendrick was describing corresponded exactly to a period I remembered with unusual clarity, though from an entirely different vantage point than the one being presented to this room. We needed this expertise urgently but discreetly, Kendrick continued. Corporate espionage is real in our industry. If our competitors had known we were struggling with manufacturing scalability, they could have used that information strategically against us. So we structured the engagement as a confidential consulting contract, bringing in specialized expertise without broadcasting our challenges publicly. Kendrick paused, letting the setup establish itself before delivering what was clearly going to be significant information. The consultant we hired completed an analysis of our manufacturing processes, identified 12 critical bottlenecks, and developed solutions that reduced our production costs by 42%, while improving quality metrics across every measurement category. That work was foundational to everything quantum dynamics has achieved since then. Our record growth, our expanded market position, the financial success that has enabled promotions like the ones we celebrated tonight, all of it traces back to the manufacturing revolution this consultant initiated. I was no longer breathing normally. The room felt simultaneously too hot and too cold. My hands gripped my champagne glass with enough force that I registered distant concern about the possibility of it shattering. For 6 years, that consultant has continued working with quantum dynamics on a confidential basis, Kendrick said. Additional projects, strategic analyses, technical problem solving that has consistently delivered exceptional value. The work has been invisible to most people in this company because confidentiality was part of the contract structure. But the impact has been enormous. Marcus was still smiling, though I could see confusion beginning to cloud his expression. He was trying to determine why Kendrick was discussing confidential consulting work at his promotion celebration. What connection existed between this narrative and his own advancement? Tonight, I want to recognize that contribution publicly, Kendrick said, and his eyes moved across the room until they found me standing near the windows. Dr. Sophia Chun, would you please join me at the podium? The room erupted into confused murmuring. Approximately 200 people simultaneously trying to process what they had just heard, to reconcile the CEO calling my name with everything they had assumed about my role and identity. I saw heads turning, people looking between Marcus and me, trying to understand relationships and implications that had just been revealed. Marcus's face had gone through several rapid transformations. Confusion gave way to shock gave way to something that might have been anger or might have been fear, the emotions moving too quickly for clear identification. His eyes locked onto mine across the room with an intensity that communicated betrayal, though who had actually betrayed whom was suddenly a very complicated question. I set my champagne glass on the nearest table and walked toward the podium. Each step felt surreal, as though I were moving through a dream where the normal rules of physics and social interaction had been suspended. The crowd parted to create a path, people stepping aside while staring with naked curiosity at the corporate wife who was apparently something entirely different from what everyone had assumed. When I reached the podium, Kendrick extended his hand. I shook it, feeling the firm professional grip of someone acknowledging a peer rather than the softer social handshake typically offered to spouses at corporate events. Dr. Chun, thank you for allowing me to break confidentiality this evening. I know you've preferred to keep your consulting work private, but I felt this was an appropriate moment to acknowledge your contributions publicly. He gestured for me to stand beside him at the podium, positioning me not as an audience member being recognized briefly, but as someone sharing the platform, someone whose presence carried equivalent weight to his own. The physical positioning communicated status more effectively than words could have. 6 years ago, Dr. Sophia Chun was completing a consulting project for a different firm when one of our board members heard about her work and recommended we approach her about our manufacturing challenges, Kendrick explained to the room. At that time, Dr. Chun had recently stepped back from full-time employment to focus on family responsibilities, but she was accepting select consulting engagements that interested her technically. The phrase stepped back from full-time employment was doing considerable rhetorical work, translating what Marcus and I had framed as me becoming a stay-at-home mother into language that preserved my professional identity and agency. I had not failed to maintain my career. I had made strategic choices about how to allocate my time and expertise. Dr. Chun holds a dual master's degree in electrical engineering and business administration from Columbia University, Kendrick continued, and I watched this information land on people who had spent years making assumptions about my educational background and capabilities. Her graduate research focused on manufacturing optimization for advanced materials, which made her uniquely qualified to address our specific challenges. Marcus was still standing near the bar, his body language rigid with tension, his expression carefully neutral in the way that suggested enormous effort being expended to maintain composure. Vanessa stood beside him, her earlier confidence replaced by visible uncertainty about her role in whatever was unfolding. The confidentiality provisions in Dr. Chen's consulting contract were structured at her request, Kendrick said, and I appreciated his framing even as I recognized the political necessity behind his public acknowledgement. She wanted to ensure that her work was evaluated on its own merits, rather than being complicated by her family connection to our employees. That discretion has served both parties well, but I believe there is value in transparency now, particularly in light of this evening's celebrations. He turned to look at me directly, his expression carrying respect that felt genuine rather than performed. Dr. Chun, your contributions to quantum dynamics have been extraordinary. Would you be willing to share briefly about the work you've been doing? The microphone was being offered to me. The room waited with attention that felt different from the polite interest people had shown during Marcus's acceptance speech. This was genuine curiosity, hunger for information that would help them recalibrate their understanding of relationships and power dynamics they had thought they understood. I had not prepared for this moment, had not anticipated that 6 years of carefully maintained confidentiality would be dissolved in a single evening. But I had spent decades developing the ability to think clearly under pressure, to organize complex information quickly, to communicate technical concepts to audiences with varying levels of expertise. Those capabilities did not disappear simply because the context was personally fraught. "Thank you, Robert," I said, hearing my own voice amplified through the sound system with a clarity that felt strange after years of being unheard in professional contexts. The work has been fascinating technically. Quantum dynamics was dealing with challenges that required integration of materials science, electrical engineering, and manufacturing systems thinking. Solving those problems required understanding not just the technical constraints, but also the business pressures and organizational dynamics that shaped how solutions could be implemented. I was finding my rhythm now, slipping into the intellectual mode that had always felt most natural to me, the mode I had been trained for through years of rigorous education, and had maintained through selective consulting projects even while managing domestic responsibilities. The initial project focused on manufacturing scalability for composite materials, but subsequent projects have addressed supply chain optimization, quality control systems, and most recently, automation integration for the new production facility. The automation project Dr. Chun just referenced, Kendrick interjected, was completed 4 months ago, and is projected to reduce our production costs by an additional 30% over the next 2 years. That cost reduction is directly enabling the expansion plans that will create approximately 200 new jobs and position quantum dynamics for aggressive growth in emerging markets. 200 new jobs. Expansion plans. Market positioning. These were outcomes that would be discussed in investor presentations and board meetings, achievements that executives would claim credit for in their performance reviews and promotion justifications. And they traced directly to work I had completed while maintaining the fiction that I was simply a stay-at-home mother with no professional identity beyond supporting my husband's career. Dr. Chun has also provided strategic consulting on several personnel and organizational structure questions, Kendrick continued, and I felt my stomach tighten because this was moving into territory that directly intersected with Marcus's promotion and the evening's earlier celebrations, including the reorganization that created the Vice President of Strategic Development position and identified the appropriate candidate for that role. The room's energy shifted again. People were now understanding that my invisible consulting work had not just addressed technical manufacturing challenges, but had also shaped the organizational decisions that had culminated in tonight's promotion ceremony. That I had been operating behind the scenes in ways that directly affected careers and advancement trajectories, including Marcus's. "I want to be clear," I said, taking control of the narrative before implications could spin in directions that would be damaging for multiple people, that my consulting work has always been completely separate from my family relationships. Robert can confirm that my contract includes strict provisions preventing me from having any influence over personnel decisions affecting family members. I provided analysis and recommendations regarding organizational structure, but I was explicitly excluded from discussions about who should fill the positions that structure created. This was technically true. My contract did include those provisions, but it was also incomplete truth, because organizational structure recommendations inevitably shaped who would be successful candidates for positions within that structure. I had designed a role that aligned perfectly with Marcus's capabilities and experience, because I knew his capabilities and experience intimately. The wall between my consulting work and family interest had been more permeable than the strict contractual language suggested. "Dr. Chen's professional integrity has been impeccable," Kendrick said, reinforcing the narrative that would protect both of us from implications of impropriety. "Her work has been evaluated by multiple executives and board members who can attest to its quality and independence. Tonight's acknowledgement is not about revealing conflicts of interest but about recognizing contributions that have been invisible for too long." He paused, letting that framing establish itself before continuing. "I also want to announce that Quantum Dynamics Board of Directors has approved a new position that we are offering to Dr. Chun. We would like her to join the company full-time as Senior Vice President of Technical Innovation, a role that would involve leading our R&D strategy and continuing the transformational work she has been doing on a consulting basis. The room exploded into applause, the kind of enthusiastic response that suggested people were genuinely impressed, rather than just performing corporate politeness. I stood at the podium feeling multiple contradictory emotions simultaneously: pride at having my work recognized publicly, vindication at having my capabilities acknowledged by people who had dismissed me as merely a corporate wife, anger at the years of invisible contribution that had preceded this moment, and underneath all of it, a deep sadness about what this revelation meant for my marriage to a man who was currently staring at me with an expression I could not fully read, but that definitely did not communicate celebration or support. "I appreciate the offer enormously," I said, my voice steadier than I felt internally. "I will need time to consider it carefully. This would represent a significant change in how I structure my professional and personal responsibilities." "Of course," Kendrick said. "Take whatever time you need. The offer stands whenever you are ready to discuss it further." He turned back to address the full room. "I want to thank everyone for their patience with this unexpected addition to tonight's program. I felt it was important to acknowledge Dr. Chen's contributions, particularly on an evening when we are celebrating advancement and achievement. Her work exemplifies the kind of innovative thinking that drives this company's success." The applause continued as I stepped back from the podium. Kendrick returned to closing remarks about appreciating everyone's attendance and wishing them safe travels home. I stood to the side, watching the crowd begin to disperse while aware that many people were positioning themselves to approach me, to offer congratulations or ask questions or simply recalibrate their understanding of who I was and what role I played in the professional ecosystem they inhabited. But the person I was most aware of was Marcus, still standing near the bar, still rigid with tension, still staring at me with an expression that was finally clarifying into something I recognized: betrayal. He felt betrayed. His wife had been maintaining a secret professional identity for 6 years, had been working for his employer without his knowledge, had been operating in his professional world, while he had assumed she was focused entirely on domestic responsibilities. The irony was almost overwhelming. He felt betrayed by my competence, by my continued professional engagement, by my refusal to actually become the diminished version of myself that our marriage structure had implied I should accept. Meanwhile, I had spent the evening being publicly erased, watching him praise his secretary as the smart one, while I stood invisible and unacknowledged despite years of supporting his career with strategic thinking and problem-solving capabilities he had apparently forgotten I possessed. People were approaching now, colleagues of Marcus whose names I knew from years of hearing stories about office dynamics. They offered congratulations with tones that mixed genuine appreciation and recalibrated assessment. I was no longer just Marcus's wife. I was someone who had been shaping their professional environment invisibly, someone whose expertise had influenced their company's trajectory in ways they had not previously understood. I accepted the congratulations graciously, maintained appropriate professional demeanor, performed the role that the situation required while my actual attention remained fixed on Marcus across the room. We would need to talk clearly. We would need to process what had just happened and what it meant for our marriage, our family structure, the assumptions that had governed our relationship for the past decade. But that conversation would not happen in this ballroom surrounded by his colleagues and superiors. It would happen later, in private, where the performance could finally drop and we could confront honestly the gap between what he had assumed I was and what I had actually been all along. The CEO's revelation had transformed the evening from celebration of Marcus's advancement into recognition of my hidden competence. The question now was what transformation this revelation would trigger in our marriage, in our family, in the carefully constructed story we had been telling ourselves about who we were and what we valued. I did not know the answer to that question yet, but I knew that the comfortable fiction of our previous dynamic had been permanently shattered. We would need to construct something new in its place, or acknowledge that the gap between his perception and my reality had become too wide to bridge. The evening was ending, but the real reckoning was just beginning. The parking garage beneath the Hartfield Hotel was nearly empty when Marcus and I finally left the event. Most guests had departed within 30 minutes of Kendrick's unexpected revelation, The evening's social energy deflated by the tension that had settled over the room after my identity was exposed. People had congratulated me with enthusiasm that felt genuine but uncomfortable, their words carrying undertones of recalibration, as they reassessed years of assumptions about the quiet wife who attended corporate functions without making memorable impressions. Marcus had remained near the bar during those final conversations, accepting congratulations from colleagues with mechanical politeness while watching me interact with people who were now treating me as a professional equal rather than a decorative spouse. Vanessa had disappeared sometime during the chaos, slipping away without saying goodbye to either of us, her earlier prominence in the evening's narrative superseded by revelations that rendered her recognition suddenly less significant. We walked to Marcus's Tesla in silence, our footsteps echoing against concrete in the cavernous garage. He had driven us to the event, as he usually did for company functions, and I had not thought to question that arrangement despite knowing I might consume alcohol that would make driving inadvisable. The assumption that he would manage logistics while I performed my supporting role had been so deeply embedded that I had not considered alternatives. Marcus unlocked the car with his key fob, the lights flashing in the dim garage. I moved toward the passenger side while he headed to the driver's position, both of us enacting familiar choreography without discussion. The car's interior still carried the new vehicle smell despite being 6 months old, leather and electronics combining into the olfactory signature of expensive consumption. Marcus had purchased this car shortly after his promotion to Director of Operations 3 years ago, positioning it as appropriate to his elevated status and necessary for client meetings where vehicles communicated professional success. I had driven a 7-year-old Honda Accord that I had purchased used, its primary virtue being reliability rather than status signaling. The contrast between our vehicles had never been explicitly discussed but had communicated clearly the hierarchy of importance between his professional image and my practical transportation needs. The Tesla's screen illuminated as Marcus started the vehicle, displaying the navigation system and audio controls with the clean minimalist interface that characterized all of Elon Musk's product design. Marcus tapped the screen to input our home address in Evanston, though the car's memory already knew the route we drove multiple times weekly. The gesture seemed to be more about having something to do with his hands than about actual navigational necessity. We exited the parking garage onto Michigan Avenue, merging into the light Friday evening traffic that moved north along the lakeshore. The Chicago skyline glittered to our right, Lake Michigan stretching dark and vast to our left, the familiar geography of our daily lives suddenly feeling like scenery from someone else's existence. Everything looked the same as it had during the drive to the hotel 3 hours earlier, but the context had transformed so completely that similarity felt disorienting rather than comforting. Marcus drove in silence, his attention apparently fixed on the road with unusual intensity. His hands gripped the steering wheel at precisely 10 and 2 o'clock, his posture rigid, his jaw tight with tension that radiated through the car's interior like heat from an engine. I sat in the passenger seat watching the city slide past, waiting for him to initiate the conversation we clearly needed to have, unwilling to be the one who broke the silence first. Minutes accumulated into a quarter hour. We passed through Streeterville, then into the Gold Coast, the neighborhoods demarcated by subtle shifts in architecture and demographics visible even at night. Marcus remained silent, his focus apparently absorbed entirely by the act of driving despite the light traffic and the Tesla's numerous automated systems that made the task almost passive. I understood what was happening. He was processing, trying to organize his thoughts and emotions into something coherent before attempting to articulate them. This was characteristic of how Marcus handled complex situations. He needed time to think before he could discuss effectively, needed to develop an internal narrative before engaging external conversation. I had learned this about him early in our relationship and had generally accommodated it, giving him space to process before expecting dialogue. But tonight my patience for accommodation was limited. I had spent the evening being erased publicly, being invisible while he praised someone else, maintaining composure through humiliation I had not deserved. Then I had been forced into visibility in ways I had not chosen, my professional identity exposed without my control over timing or framing. I had earned the right to expect him to manage his discomfort without requiring me to facilitate that management through extended silence. "Are you planning to speak at all during this drive?" I said finally, my voice cutting through the car's quiet with an edge I did not attempt to soften. Or are we just going to pretend nothing happened until we get home, and can continue avoiding the conversation indefinitely? Marcus's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles whitening with pressure. His jaw worked as though he were physically forcing words through resistance. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled but barely, each word enunciated with precision that suggested significant effort to maintain composure. I am trying to understand how my wife has been working for my company for 6 years without telling me. I am trying to understand how you could maintain that level of deception while claiming we had an honest marriage. I am trying to understand who you actually are, because apparently I have been married to someone completely different from the person I thought I knew. The accusations landed with force, each one weighted with genuine hurt beneath the anger. But they also revealed assumptions that were so fundamentally flawed, I felt rage rising in my chest, hot and clarifying in ways the evening's earlier humiliations had not quite triggered. Deception, I said, letting the word sit between us for a moment before continuing. You think I deceived you by maintaining professional competence while you assumed I had abandoned my career entirely to support yours. You think I lied by continuing to use my education and expertise while you decided I was just a stay-at-home mother with no identity beyond our family. You think I betrayed you by being more than you bothered to notice I was. You signed confidentiality agreements that prevented you from telling me about your work. Marcus shot back, his control beginning to fracture. You deliberately structured contracts that made it impossible to discuss what you were doing. That is not maintaining professional competence, Sophia. That is actively hiding your activities from your husband. The confidentiality provisions were standard for consulting work, I said, forcing my voice to remain level despite the emotions churning through my system. They were not designed to hide my work from you specifically. They were designed to protect quantum dynamics competitive information from exactly the kind of corporate espionage Kendrick mentioned in his remarks. The fact that you never asked what I was doing with my time, that you never expressed curiosity about how I spent my days while you were at the office, that you assumed domestic responsibilities consumed all my intellectual capacity, that is your failure of attention, not my deception. I asked about your day regularly, Marcus protested, his voice rising. Every evening at dinner I would ask how your day was. You would talk about the kids' activities and household tasks. You never mentioned consulting projects or technical problem solving or any of the work Kendrick was describing tonight. You asked how my day was as a formality, Marcus. You asked the way people ask, how are you, in passing, without actually wanting a detailed response. When I tried to discuss technical concepts or business strategy, your eyes would glaze over and you would change the subject to your work challenges, which apparently were the only professional problems worthy of detailed analysis in our evening conversations. We were approaching the Northwestern University campus, the boundary marker that indicated we were entering Evanston and nearing our home. The argument had found its rhythm now, accusations and counter-accusations flowing with the kind of fluency that suggested we were finally articulating grievances that had been accumulating beneath the surface for years. I included you in my work discussions because I valued your input, Marcus said, and I could hear genuine confusion beneath his defensiveness. I talked through my challenges with you because I respected your analytical capabilities and wanted your perspective. You are now characterizing that as me dominating conversations and dismissing your work, but at the time you seemed engaged and interested in helping me navigate my career. I was engaged and interested, I said, trying to find language that could bridge the gap between his perception and my experience. I value strategic thinking and problem solving. Helping you analyze your work situations was genuinely interesting to me intellectually. But there was never reciprocity, Marcus. I helped you process your professional challenges constantly. You never asked about mine. You never seemed to notice that I might also be engaged in work that required sophisticated analysis and strategy. You assumed that because I was home during the day managing our children and household, my intellectual capabilities were going unused. Because you told me you were taking a step back from your career, Marcus said, his voice carrying frustration that he was being blamed for believing what I had explicitly communicated. We made that decision together, Sophia. We agreed that me focusing on career advancement while you managed home responsibilities was the most practical arrangement for our family. I did not unilaterally impose that structure. You agreed to it. This was the central tension, the question that had been hovering beneath every conversation about career and family throughout our marriage. Had I agreed to step back from professional work? Or had I been pressured into an arrangement that served Marcus's ambitions while limiting my own? Had our decision been genuinely collaborative, or had it been shaped by unequal power dynamics that made my agreement less than fully voluntary? I agreed to prioritize flexibility over full-time employment, I said carefully, trying to articulate distinctions that felt crucial, but were difficult to express cleanly. I agreed that managing childcare and household responsibilities should be primarily my domain while you focused on career advancement. I did not agree to cease being a professional person with capabilities and ambitions beyond domestic labor. I did not agree to make myself intellectually small enough to fit comfortably into the supporting spouse role. I did not agree to be invisible. Invisible, Marcus repeated, tasting the word as though trying to understand its meaning. You are claiming you were invisible? You attend every company event. You know all my colleagues. You are constantly included in our professional social circle. How is that invisible? I was visible as your wife, I said, as an appendage to your professional identity, as someone whose value was defined entirely by connection to you. Tonight was the first time anyone at Quantum Dynamics has seen me as an independent professional with my own expertise and accomplishments. The first time anyone has recognized that I might have contributed something beyond supporting your career through domestic labor. We had turned onto our street now, the familiar tree-lined avenue with its well-maintained homes and careful landscaping. Our house appeared on the right, the craftsman-style structure we had purchased 4 years ago, when Marcus's salary increase had made the mortgage financially feasible. The home was comfortable and aesthetically pleasing, precisely the kind of property that communicated upper-middle-class professional success. Marcus pulled into the driveway and turned off the car, but neither of us moved to exit. The garage door remained closed, sealing us into the artificial privacy of the vehicle's interior, a liminal space between the public performance of the evening and the private reality of our home life. You are describing a version of our marriage I do not recognize, Marcus said finally, his voice quieter now but no less intense. You are characterizing me as someone who dismissed and diminished you, who took advantage of your contributions without recognition or reciprocity. That is not who I believe I have been. That is not the person I understand myself to be. I know, I said, and I meant it. The tragedy of our situation was not that Marcus was deliberately cruel or consciously exploitative. The tragedy was that he genuinely did not see what he had been taking from me, genuinely did not understand how the arrangements that felt practical and equitable to him had been slowly eroding my professional identity and intellectual engagement. You are not a villain, Marcus. You are just someone who benefited from structural arrangements that served your interests while limiting mine, and who never questioned those arrangements because they felt natural and appropriate within conventional frameworks about marriage and career and family responsibilities. But you did question them, Marcus said, and now I could hear something new in his voice. Not anger exactly, but something closer to grief. You questioned them enough to maintain a secret professional life for 6 years. You questioned them enough to work for my company without telling me. You questioned them enough to let me believe you were content with our arrangement while you were actually building an entirely separate identity I knew nothing about. I did not build a separate identity, I said, feeling my own grief rising to match his. I maintained the identity I have always had. The person I was in graduate school, the person you claim to admire and love, the person with technical expertise and strategic thinking capabilities and professional ambitions. That person did not disappear when we had children. She just became invisible to you because you stopped looking for her once she was no longer serving your needs directly. The silence that followed was different from the earlier tension in the car. This was heavier, more final, the silence of people recognizing that fundamental disagreements existed between them, that the gap between perception and reality might be too wide to bridge through explanation alone. Tonight when you called Vanessa the smart one, I said quietly, I was standing 3 feet away. You publicly praised your secretary's intelligence and strategic thinking, while I stood there invisible, despite the fact that I have been providing you with strategic analysis and problem-solving support throughout your entire career. Despite the fact that I hold advanced degrees from one of the top engineering programs in the country. Despite the fact that I have been doing exactly the kind of high-level technical and business work you were attributing to Vanessa, except I was doing it invisibly while she was receiving recognition and advancement and professional validation. Marcus turned to look at me fully for the first time since we had left the hotel. In the dim light from the dashboard, his face showed struggle, multiple emotions competing for dominance. I did not mean to diminish you. The recognition of Vanessa was not intended as a comparison to you. It was about acknowledging her professional contributions, not about denying yours. But you did not acknowledge mine, I said. You have never acknowledged mine publicly. You have never stood in front of your colleagues and identified me as someone whose intelligence and strategic thinking have been instrumental to your success. You have never called me the smart one. You have never seemed to notice that I might deserve that recognition more than your secretary does. Because I did not know, Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. I did not know you were still working professionally. I did not know you had consulting contracts with my company. I did not know you were solving the same kinds of complex problems you used to solve when we were in graduate school together. How could I acknowledge contributions I did not know you were making? You could have asked, I said simply. You could have maintained curiosity about who I was beyond my role as your wife and the mother of your children. You could have wondered what I was doing with my considerable intellectual capabilities during the hours when you were at work. You could have noticed that I have always been the smart one, Marcus. You just stopped caring about that once it was no longer directly serving your professional advancement. The words hung between us, too honest to take back, too painful to leave unchallenged but too accurate to effectively refute. We sat in the darkened car in our driveway, two people who had built a life together slowly recognizing that the foundation of that life had been structured on assumptions and arrangements that one of us had believed were working while the other had been quietly suffocating. What happens now? Marcus asked finally. Where do we go from here? I looked at our house through the windshield, the structure that represented everything we had built together. The mortgage we shared. The children sleeping inside with the babysitter we had hired for the evening. The accumulated furniture and photographs and daily routines that constituted our family life. All of it suddenly felt precarious, built on ground that was less stable than I had understood. I do not know, I said honestly. I do not know if we can bridge this gap. I do not know if you can see me the way I actually need to be seen. I do not know if I can continue being invisible while you receive recognition for achievements that are partly built on my invisible contributions. I do not know if our marriage can survive the revelation of who I actually am versus who you assumed I was. I want to try, Marcus said, and I could hear desperation beneath the words. I do not want our marriage to end. I do not want to lose our family. I want to understand what went wrong and how to fix it. Maybe what went wrong is that nothing actually went wrong in your eyes, I said. Maybe what went wrong is that the arrangement that felt functional and appropriate to you was actually slowly destroying me, and you never noticed because destruction that happens slowly and invisibly is easy to miss when you are not looking for it. I opened the car door, letting in the cool evening air and breaking the sealed intimacy of our mobile confessional. We should go inside. The babysitter has been here for hours. We can continue this conversation after we have both had time to process what happened tonight. Marcus nodded, his expression showing exhaustion that went beyond the late hour. We gathered our belongings and walked to the front door, maintaining careful distance between our bodies, the physical separation communicating emotional reality that neither of us was ready to articulate more explicitly. The house was quiet when we entered, the babysitter watching television in the living room with the sound muted. We paid her and thanked her for staying late, maintaining the performance of normalcy that the situation required. After she left, we went through the mechanical routines of checking on sleeping children and preparing for bed, moving through our home like strangers performing choreographed movements in a play neither of us had agreed to be part of. When we finally settled into our bedroom, the silence between us felt permanent rather than temporary. We lay in our bed with careful space between our bodies, both of us staring at the ceiling in the darkness, processing revelations that had transformed our marriage in the space of a single evening. I did not know what would happen tomorrow or in the weeks that would follow. I did not know whether Marcus and I could reconstruct our relationship on foundations that acknowledged my actual identity, rather than his comfortable assumptions. I did not know whether the professional recognition I had received tonight would lead to the senior vice president position Kendrick had offered or would remain merely a moment of visibility that would fade back into familiar invisibility. But I knew that something fundamental had changed. The careful fiction of our previous dynamic had been shattered completely. Whatever we built going forward would need to be constructed on different principles, with different assumptions, with recognition that I was not and had never been content to be merely the supporting character in someone else's story. The question was whether Marcus could accept that recognition, could celebrate it rather than resenting it, could reconstruct his understanding of our marriage in ways that honored who I actually was rather than who he had needed me to be. The answer to that question would determine everything that followed. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of gray autumn light that made Chicago feel perpetually on the edge of rain. I woke at 6:30. My body trained by years of early rising to accommodate children's schedules and household demands that began before the rest of the family stirred. The bedroom was quiet except for Marcus's steady breathing beside me, his sleep apparently undisturbed by the revelations that had kept me cycling through shallow rest and anxious wakefulness throughout the night. I lay still for several minutes, watching the ceiling gradually brighten as dawn progressed, trying to organize the chaos of emotions and thoughts that had been churning since the previous evening. Pride at having my work recognized, anger at years of invisibility, fear about what the revelation meant for my marriage, excitement about the professional opportunity Kendrick had offered, anxiety about how to navigate competing responsibilities if I accepted full-time employment. All of it swirling together into a complexity that felt overwhelming in the pre-dawn quiet. The house began its morning sounds. Emma's alarm went off in her room down the hall, followed by the sound of her moving around with the unhurried weekend pace of a 12-year-old who had nowhere urgent to be. James would sleep later if allowed, the 9-year-old's natural rhythm tilting toward late nights and lazy mornings that I constantly negotiated with school schedules during the week. I extracted myself from bed carefully, trying not to wake Marcus, and moved through my morning routine with mechanical precision. Bathroom, then downstairs to start coffee and begin breakfast preparations. The kitchen was my domain in ways that had become so naturalized I rarely questioned the arrangement anymore. Marcus could cook competently when necessary, but meal planning and preparation had become my responsibility by default, one of dozens of domestic tasks that had accumulated around me like sediment over years of our marriage. Emma appeared as I was setting out cereal and fruit, her dark hair tangled from sleep, her expression carrying the particular adolescent combination of wanting independence while still needing parental structure. "How was the party last night?" she asked, pouring herself orange juice and settling at the kitchen table with her phone already in hand. "Eventful," I said, which was accurate if dramatically understated. "Your father received his promotion officially. There were speeches and celebration." "Cool," Emma said with the disinterest of someone for whom corporate advancement held no particular relevance. "Can I go to Madison's house this afternoon? Her mom said they're going to the mall and invited me along." We negotiated logistics while I prepared French toast, the conversation flowing through familiar channels of permission-seeking and schedule coordination. Emma remained absorbed in her phone, texting with friends while simultaneously engaging in our discussion, the multitasking capability of her generation on full display. The normalcy of the interaction felt both comforting and surreal, given how much had shifted in my internal landscape over the past 12 hours. Marcus appeared as I was plating breakfast, his hair damp from a shower, his expression carefully neutral in ways that suggested he was working to maintain composure. "Good morning," he said to Emma, ruffling her hair in the gesture of affection she tolerated from him but would not have accepted from me anymore. The gender dynamics of adolescent development making fathers safe while mothers became complicated. "Morning, Dad," Emma said. "Congratulations on your promotion. Mom said you got it official last night." "Thank you, sweetheart," Marcus said, accepting coffee from me without making eye contact, the avoidance communicating that our unresolved conversation from the previous evening remained very much present despite the breakfast table domesticity we were performing. Big step forward for our family. The phrase "our family" carried weight it might not have held before last night. Whose career advancement actually benefited our family? Whose professional success had been structured through whose invisible labor? Whose opportunities had been prioritized while whose had been deferred or denied? These questions hovered beneath the surface of ordinary morning conversation, making simple exchanges feel loaded with implications neither of us was ready to address directly in front of our daughter. James wandered downstairs 20 minutes later, drawn by the smell of French toast and the sounds of family activity. He was still in pajamas, his hair standing up in multiple directions, his 9-year-old self not yet self-conscious enough to care about appearance before being fully awake. "Is there syrup?" he asked. His primary concern focused entirely on immediate breakfast optimization rather than parental dynamics he had no reason to notice were strained. We moved through breakfast with practiced efficiency, the four of us occupying our assigned roles in the weekend morning routine that had been refined through years of repetition. Marcus read news on his tablet while eating, his attention apparently absorbed by articles about politics and business that provided convenient excuse for limited conversation. Emma texted continuously with friends while consuming food at a pace that suggested eating was incidental to her social coordination activities. James ate with single-minded focus, his appetite substantial and his interest in anything beyond food minimal until he was satisfied. I managed the flow, refilling juice glasses and coffee cups, monitoring that everyone ate adequately, clearing dishes as they accumulated, maintaining the domestic infrastructure that allowed everyone else to focus on their individual priorities without attending to collective logistics. The role was so familiar I performed it automatically, my conscious attention divided between the immediate tasks and the larger questions about whether I wanted to continue performing this role indefinitely, or whether last night's revelation had created opening for fundamental restructuring. After breakfast, Emma departed for Madison's house with detailed instructions about when to return and expectations about checking in periodically. James migrated to the living room to play video games, his weekend entertainment plan requiring no parental involvement beyond periodic monitoring that he was not exceeding screen time limits. Marcus retreated to his home office, claiming he needed to catch up on email and review documents for Monday meetings, the excuse plausible enough that challenging it would require confrontation neither of us seemed ready to initiate. I was left in the kitchen cleaning breakfast dishes, wiping counters, restoring order to the domestic space that would become disordered again within hours when lunch preparation began. The mundane tasks provided rhythm without requiring thought, my hands moving through familiar motions while my mind continued processing the previous evening's revelations and their implications for everything that might follow. The doorbell rang at 10:30, unexpected on a Saturday morning when we rarely received unannounced visitors. I dried my hands and moved to answer it, finding Robert Kendrick standing on our front porch holding a leather portfolio case and wearing casual weekend clothing that made him look less corporate than he had appeared at the previous evening's event. "Dr. Chun," he said with a slight smile that acknowledged the strangeness of his appearance. "I apologize for the intrusion. I know this is your family time, and I am arriving without invitation or warning. But I was hoping I might have a few minutes to speak with you about last night's offer, if you are willing." I stood in the doorway processing this unexpected development, trying to determine appropriate response to my husband's CEO appearing at our home, less than 12 hours after publicly revealing my consulting work and offering me a senior executive position. "Of course," I said finally, stepping aside to allow him entry. "Please come in. Can I offer you coffee?" "Coffee would be wonderful, thank you," Kendrick said, following me into the house and taking in the domestic environment with a kind of observational attention that suggested he was calibrating his understanding of my life circumstances. The house was clean but lived in, toys and books creating the particular organized chaos that characterized families with school-age children. We passed through to the kitchen, where I poured coffee while Kendrick settled at the table where my family had eaten breakfast 30 minutes earlier. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the sound of unfamiliar voices, his expression showing surprise that quickly transformed into professional courtesy as he recognized his CEO. "Robert," he said, extending his hand for a handshake that Kendrick returned with easy confidence. "I wasn't expecting to see you this morning. Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, Marcus," Kendrick said smoothly. "I wanted to follow up with Sophia about some professional matters we discussed last night. I apologize for intruding on your weekend. I know my timing is unconventional, but I wanted to speak with her while the conversation was fresh rather than waiting for Monday when schedules become complicated." The explanation was plausible but incomplete, and I could see Marcus trying to determine whether he should remain present for this conversation or whether his presence was unwanted. The power dynamics were complex. This was his house, but Kendrick was here to speak with me about my professional opportunities. Marcus was Kendrick's employee, but I was being courted as a potential executive peer. The normal hierarchies that governed their relationship at quantum dynamics did not clearly apply in this domestic setting. "Marcus, you are welcome to join us if you would like," Kendrick said, offering explicit permission that acknowledged the ambiguity. "This conversation affects your family's circumstances, and I respect that you should have input into decisions that Sophia makes about professional commitments." Marcus nodded and took a seat at the table, positioning himself physically present, but allowing Kendrick to direct the conversation's flow. I poured coffee for Marcus and refilled my own cup before sitting down, the three of us forming a triangle around the kitchen table where dozens of family meals and homework sessions and ordinary domestic conversations had occurred over the 4 years we had lived in this house. "Dr. Chun, I want to be direct about why I am here," Kendrick said, opening his portfolio to reveal documents and charts that suggested he had prepared thoroughly for this conversation. "Last night I offered you the position of Senior Vice President of Technical Innovation. That offer was genuine and remains open for your consideration. But I recognize that I put you in a difficult position by making that offer publicly without having discussed it with you privately first. I owe you an apology for that breach of professional courtesy." I appreciated the acknowledgement even as I recognized the political calculation behind it. Kendrick was protecting himself against potential accusations that he had pressured me or created uncomfortable dynamics by making a public offer I had not been prepared to receive. "I appreciate that, Robert," I said carefully. "The timing was certainly unexpected, but I understand you had strategic reasons for choosing that moment to reveal my consulting work and extend the offer." "I did have strategic reasons," Kendrick confirmed, "though I should have balanced those strategic interests against your personal circumstances more carefully. The reality is that quantum dynamics needs the kind of technical leadership and innovative thinking you have been providing on a consulting basis. We are at a growth inflection point where having that expertise integrated into our executive team, rather than engaged peripherally through consulting contracts, would significantly enhance our competitive positioning." He pulled out several documents showing market analyses and competitive landscapes, graphs demonstrating quantum dynamics growth trajectory against industry benchmarks, projections for various strategic scenarios that depended on different assumptions about technical innovation capabilities. The presentation was thorough and professionally compelling, the kind of strategic overview that would be used to convince board members or investors about necessary organizational decisions. "What I am showing you is the business case for why quantum dynamics needs you in this role," Kendrick said, his tone shifting into the authoritative mode he probably used in boardroom presentations. "But I also want to be transparent about the personal factors that make this decision complicated for you. You have been structuring your professional work around family responsibilities for years. Accepting a full-time executive position would require significant changes to how you allocate your time and energy. Those changes would affect your husband's career, your children's daily lives, and your own work-life balance in ways that are not trivial." Marcus sat very still, his coffee cup held between his hands, his attention fixed on Kendrick with the kind of focused listening that suggested he was processing information that had direct bearing on his own circumstances. I wondered what he was thinking, whether he was recognizing that my professional opportunities might now compete with his career advancement rather than supporting it, whether he was feeling threatened by the possibility that I might accept a role that would elevate me to his organizational level or above. "The compensation package for this position is substantial," Kendrick continued, sliding a document across the table that showed salary, bonus structure, stock options, and benefits in detailed breakdown. Base salary of $280,000 annually, with performance bonuses that could add another 30 to 50%. Stock options vesting over 4 years that would be worth approximately $500,000 at current valuations. More if the company continues growing as projected. Full executive benefits including enhanced health insurance, retirement contributions, and professional development budget. I looked at the numbers, my analytical mind automatically calculating what that compensation would mean for our family finances, how it would change the balance of economic power between Marcus and me, what opportunities it would create and what constraints it would impose. The base salary alone was $40,000 higher than Marcus's new vice president compensation. With bonuses, I could potentially earn nearly twice what he would make in his promoted position. The implications were staggering. I would become the primary earner in our family, My career would become the central organizing principle around which other decisions were structured rather than the peripheral consideration that could be subordinated to Marcus's advancement. The entire architecture of our marriage, built on assumptions about whose work mattered more and whose career should be prioritized, would need to be reconstructed from foundation level. I understand this is a significant decision that you cannot make immediately, Kendrick said, apparently reading my expression accurately. I am not here to pressure you for an answer today. I am here to provide you with complete information and to make clear that this offer is genuine, strategic, and supported by both our executive team and our board of directors. We want you in this role. We are prepared to offer considerable flexibility about how you structure the position to accommodate your family responsibilities. And we are committed to providing the support and resources necessary for you to be successful. He paused, letting that framing establish itself before continuing. I am also here to address directly the awkward fact that this offer affects Marcus's professional circumstances in ways that create potential complications. If you accept this position, Sophia, you will be a senior executive at Quantum Dynamics. Marcus will be a vice president reporting to the COO, who reports to me. You will not be in his direct reporting chain, but you will be his organizational peer or arguably his superior depending on how certain structural questions are resolved. That dynamic could create challenges both professionally and personally. Marcus's expression remained neutral, but I could see tension in his shoulders, in the way he held his coffee cup with just slightly too much pressure. This was the calculation he had been making since last night, the recognition that my professional advancement could fundamentally alter the power balance in our marriage and potentially threaten his own career trajectory through office politics and relationship complications neither of us could fully predict. I want to assure both of you that Quantum Dynamics is committed to managing those potential complications professionally, Kendrick continued, his attention now directed at Marcus. We have policies and structures designed to prevent conflicts of interest and ensure that family relationships do not create inappropriate influence over personnel decisions or business outcomes. Those policies would apply here. Your career trajectory, Marcus, would continue to be evaluated based on your performance and contributions, not affected positively or negatively by your relationship with Sophia. It was a reassurance that was probably necessary but impossible to guarantee completely. Human dynamics in organizational settings were far more complex than policies could fully address. If I became a senior executive at Quantum Dynamics, people would inevitably view Marcus through the lens of that relationship, would speculate about whether his promotions were influenced by my position, would navigate interactions with both of us with careful attention to avoiding offense that might have professional repercussions. I appreciate your transparency, Robert, I said finally, organizing my thoughts into a response that acknowledged the complexity without committing to any particular direction. This is clearly an important opportunity that deserves serious consideration. I need time to discuss it thoroughly with Marcus, and to think carefully about how accepting this position would affect our family's circumstances. Can you give me a timeline for when you need a decision? Take 2 weeks, Kendrick said immediately. That gives you time to process the offer, discuss implications with your family, and determine whether this opportunity aligns with your personal and professional goals. If you have questions during that period, you can contact me directly. My assistant has instructions to connect us immediately regardless of my schedule if you call. He pulled a business card from his portfolio and wrote a phone number on the back. That is my personal cell. Use it if you want to discuss anything privately rather than going through official channels. This conversation is about your career and your life, Sophia. It should be handled with the personal attention that importance deserves. The gesture felt genuine, though I recognized it was also strategic. Kendrick was creating personal connection and demonstrating respect that would make declining the offer psychologically harder, while also ensuring he maintained direct access for persuasion if I seemed inclined to refuse. Good executives were skilled at relationship management that served strategic interests, while feeling emotionally authentic. Kendrick was clearly very good at his job. He finished his coffee and stood, preparing to depart with the same efficient courtesy that had characterized his arrival. Thank you both for accommodating this interruption to your Saturday morning. Marcus, congratulations again on your promotion. You have earned it through consistent, excellent performance. Sophia, I look forward to hearing your thoughts about the SVP position when you have had time to consider it properly. I walked him to the door while Marcus remained in the kitchen, the physical positioning perhaps communicating that this was my professional opportunity to manage, rather than a shared family decision that required his immediate participation. When I returned to the kitchen after seeing Kendrick out, Marcus was still sitting at the table, staring at the compensation documents Kendrick had left behind, his expression showing emotions he was working to control. $280,000, Marcus said quietly, plus bonuses and stock options that could make your total compensation $400,000 or more. Nearly twice what I will make in my promoted position. The compensation is substantial, I agreed, sitting down across from him. But that is not the only consideration in deciding whether to accept. What are the other considerations? Marcus asked, and I could hear challenge beneath the question. Whether you want to make me feel inadequate by earning twice my salary. Whether you want to compete with me professionally while also being married to me. Whether you want to completely restructure our family's life to accommodate your career ambitions that you apparently never actually abandoned despite agreeing years ago that my career would be our primary focus. The accusations tumbled out with force that suggested they had been building pressure throughout Kendrick's visit, perhaps throughout the night and the morning, perhaps for years beneath the surface of our carefully maintained domestic arrangements. Marcus's face showed pain mixed with anger, vulnerability mixed with defensiveness, the complex emotional state of someone whose fundamental assumptions about his life were being challenged in ways he was not prepared to manage. Marcus, I said carefully, I need you to hear something important. My professional capabilities did not threaten you when we were in graduate school. You claimed to admire my intelligence and expertise. You pursued me in part because you found my competence attractive. What changed is not who I am but what role you needed me to play. You needed me to be smaller, less ambitious, more focused on supporting you than on pursuing my own goals. And I agreed to play that role because I loved you and because I believed it was temporary, and because the alternative seemed to be losing our relationship. But it was not temporary, Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. It became permanent. And now you are angry at me for believing the role you were playing was actually who you are. I am not angry at you for believing I was who I appeared to be, I said, feeling my own emotions rising to meet his. I am angry that you stopped being curious about whether there was more to me than what you were seeing. I am angry that you never asked. I am angry that you called your secretary the smart one, while I stood invisible despite being smarter and more educated and more capable than she is. I am angry that you built your career partly on my invisible contributions, and then expressed confusion about why I might want recognition for that work. We stared at each other across the kitchen table, two people who had built a life together, slowly recognizing that the foundation of that life had been structured on assumptions that only one of us had believed were working. The Saturday morning domesticity continued around us. James was playing video games in the living room, the sounds of digital combat filtering through to where we sat. Somewhere down the street a lawnmower started, the neighborhood maintenance rhythms continuing regardless of individual household dramas. I do not know how to fix this, Marcus said finally. I do not know how to be married to someone who earns twice what I earn and works at my company, and is potentially my organizational superior. I do not know how to restructure my understanding of our marriage to accommodate you being the ambitious career-focused spouse, while I figure out how to support your advancement. That was supposed to be your role, Sophia. You were supposed to be the one supporting my career. That was the agreement. That was never the agreement, I said firmly. That was the arrangement that emerged through a series of incremental decisions, each one seeming practical and temporary at the time, but collectively creating a structure that served your interests while constraining mine. I never agreed to permanently abandon my professional identity. I never agreed to be perpetually invisible. I never agreed that your dreams mattered more than mine. The impasse was clear. Marcus could not imagine our marriage functioning with me as the primary career focus. I could not imagine continuing to play the supporting role I had been occupying for years now that the cost of that role had been made visible. The gap between those positions felt potentially unbridgeable, though neither of us was ready to articulate that recognition explicitly. I need time to think, Marcus said, standing abruptly and leaving his coffee cup on the table for me to clear. I am going for a drive. I will be back later. He left the kitchen, collected his keys, and departed through the garage without saying goodbye to James or indicating when he would return. I heard his Tesla start and back out of the driveway, the electric motor's quiet hum marking his exit from the immediate situation into whatever processing space he needed to find. I remained at the kitchen table, surrounded by the documents Kendrick had left behind, staring at numbers that represented professional opportunity and personal transformation, and the potential dissolution of my marriage. All of it compressed into a decision I had 2 weeks to make, though the real decision had perhaps been made years ago when I had first agreed to make myself smaller to accommodate Marcus's need for a supporting spouse rather than an equal partner. The question now was whether I had the courage to reclaim the space I had surrendered, knowing that reclaiming it might cost me my marriage but that continuing to surrender it would cost me myself. The answer should have been obvious. But nothing about this situation felt obvious anymore. Marcus did not return until late afternoon. I spent the intervening hours maintaining the domestic routines that structured our Saturdays, preparing lunch for James, monitoring his screen time, folding laundry that had accumulated during the week, responding to text messages from Emma about when she needed to be picked up from the mall. The mundane tasks provided rhythm without requiring deep thought, my hands moving through familiar motions while my mind circled repeatedly around the impossible decision I was facing. Accept the senior vice president position and potentially destroy my marriage. Decline the position and continue the pattern of invisible contribution that had been slowly suffocating my professional identity for years. Neither option felt sustainable. Both carried costs I was not certain I could afford to pay. At 3 o'clock, while James was occupied building an elaborate Lego structure in the playroom, I called the one person whose perspective I trusted to be both honest and constructive. My graduate school friend Rachel Okonkwo answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the slightly distracted tone of someone who had been focused on something else before the phone interrupted. Sophia, hey, Rachel said, her Nigerian accent still present despite 15 years in the United States, softened but not erased by time and cultural immersion. I was literally just thinking about you this morning. How are you? How did Marcus's promotion thing go last night? It went in directions I did not anticipate, I said, hearing the understatement in my own voice. Do you have time to talk? I need advice from someone with perspective outside my immediate situation. Of course, Rachel said immediately, the distraction disappearing from her tone as she shifted into full attention mode. Let me just close my laptop. Okay, I am completely focused now. What happened? I told her everything. The promotion celebration and Marcus calling Vanessa, the smart one, while I stood invisible. Robert Kendrick taking the microphone and revealing my 6 years of confidential consulting work. The senior vice president offer made publicly without warning. The silent drive home and the painful conversation that had exposed fundamental disconnects in how Marcus and I understood our marriage. Kendrick appearing at our house this morning with compensation packages and strategic arguments for why quantum dynamics needed me in executive leadership. Marcus's inability to imagine our marriage functioning with me as the primary career focus. Rachel listened without interrupting, making occasional sounds that communicated she was tracking the narrative but not inserting her own commentary until I had finished laying out the complete situation. When I finally stopped talking, there was a long pause on the line, the kind of silence that indicated she was organizing her thoughts carefully before responding. Sophia, Rachel said finally, her voice carrying a weight that suggested what she was about to say mattered significantly. I am going to tell you something I have wanted to say for approximately 8 years, but have not said because it felt like overstepping boundaries in your marriage. But given what you just described, I think the boundary-respecting moment has passed and the truth-telling moment has arrived. Okay, I said, bracing myself for whatever observation was coming. You have been making yourself smaller for Marcus since before you even married him, Rachel said bluntly. I watched it happen in graduate school. You were the most technically brilliant person in our cohort. Professors were literally telling you that you had the potential to do groundbreaking research, that you could write your own ticket in industry or academia, that your combination of electrical engineering expertise and business acumen was rare and valuable. And then you met Marcus, who was smart and charming but frankly not in your intellectual league, and you started dimming your own light so he could feel like the smart one in the relationship. The assessment landed with force, partly because it was harsh and partly because it was accurate in ways I had been avoiding acknowledging. That is not entirely fair, I protested weakly. Marcus is highly intelligent. He has been very successful in his career. Marcus is intelligent, Rachel agreed. But you are exceptional, Sophia. There is a difference. And you have spent your entire marriage pretending that difference does not exist, so he could maintain his self-concept as the successful, ambitious spouse while you played the supporting role. I understood why you made that choice when Emma was born and you needed flexibility for childcare. But watching you maintain that diminishment year after year while your capabilities were going unused has been painful for everyone who knows what you are actually capable of achieving. I sat on the living room couch, phone pressed to my ear, feeling emotions I did not have clear names for churning through my system. Grief maybe, or recognition, or the particular pain that comes from having someone articulate truth you have been carefully avoiding. The consulting work you have been doing, Rachel continued, that was you trying to maintain some connection to your professional identity, while still playing the supporting spouse role Marcus needed. But it was also you hiding your actual capabilities because you were afraid of threatening him, afraid that if he really saw how smart and accomplished you were, he would not want to be married to you anymore. Am I wrong about that? You are not wrong, I admitted quietly. The confidentiality provisions in my consulting contracts were partly about protecting quantum dynamics competitive information, but they were also about protecting Marcus from having to confront that his wife was doing high-level technical work for his company, that his advancement was partly built on organizational structures and technical innovations I had designed, that the person he thought was just managing his household was actually still operating at the level we were both at in graduate school. Exactly, Rachel said. And now that protection has been stripped away. He knows what you have been doing. His CEO knows. His colleagues know. You cannot go back to being invisible. The question is whether you are going to step fully into your actual capabilities or whether you are going to find some new way to make yourself smaller to preserve a marriage that apparently can only function if you are playing a diminished version of yourself. The question was stark and uncomfortable. But it was also the right question. The one I had been circling around without directly addressing since the previous evening. Could my marriage to Marcus survive me being fully visible as the professionally accomplished, intellectually formidable person I actually was? Or had our relationship been built on foundations that required my diminishment for his comfort? What would you do? I asked. If you were in my position, what would you do? Rachel laughed, but there was sadness in the sound. Sophia, I have been divorced for 3 years because my ex-husband could not handle me earning more than him and having a more prominent career. When I got promoted to lead the quantum computing division at IBM, he started making comments about how I was becoming too ambitious, too focused on work, too masculine in my professional behavior. He wanted me to turn down the promotion so we could focus on having children and building a family life where he was the primary earner and I was the supportive spouse. I chose my career. The marriage ended within 6 months. I had known Rachel was divorced, but I had not known the specific circumstances that had precipitated it. Do you regret that choice? Not even a little bit, Rachel said firmly. I regret that I married someone who could not celebrate my success. I regret that I wasted 5 years with someone who needed me to be less than I was so he could feel adequate. But I do not regret choosing myself over a marriage that required my diminishment. The work I am doing at IBM is meaningful and challenging, and allows me to use my full capabilities. I have built a life that feels authentic rather than constrained. I have found community with other women in tech who understand the particular challenges of navigating male egos while building serious careers. I am happy, Sophia. More happy than I ever was when I was trying to make myself smaller to fit into someone else's vision of who I should be. Her words resonated with something I had been feeling but had not articulated even to myself, the possibility that happiness might require prioritizing authenticity over accommodation, that a good life might mean choosing myself even if that choice cost me relationships that apparently could not withstand my full presence. But you do not have children, I said, identifying the difference between our situations that felt significant. Emma and James did not choose their parents' marital dynamics. They should not have to experience family disruption because I am choosing career advancement over maintaining the marriage structure that has been providing them stability. Your children are experiencing a model of marriage where their mother makes herself invisible, so their father can feel important, Rachel countered. Emma is 12. She is watching how you navigate professional identity and family responsibility. What lessons do you want her to learn about what women should sacrifice for marriage? James is 9. He is forming his understanding of what women are capable of and how men should respond to female competence. What model do you want to provide him? The reframing was powerful. I had been thinking about my decision in terms of what I owed Marcus and what I owed our current family stability. But Rachel was pointing toward what I owed my children in terms of modeling healthy relationship dynamics and appropriate self-valuation. If I continued making myself smaller to preserve Marcus's comfort, I was teaching Emma that women should diminish themselves for men. I was teaching James that male ego was more important than female achievement. Those were not lessons I wanted to instill. They were not values I actually held. But they were the values I was communicating through my choices about how to structure my life and marriage. I am scared, I admitted. I am scared of being divorced. I am scared of disrupting my children's lives. I am scared of being the person who chose career over family, the woman who could not make her marriage work, the mother who prioritized ambition over her children's stability. Those narratives feel shameful and selfish and wrong. Those narratives are designed to keep women in their place, Rachel said bluntly. Men who prioritize career are ambitious and admirable. Women who do the same are selfish and bad mothers. Men who struggle with wives who earn more are sympathetic figures dealing with difficult circumstances. Women who diminish themselves to preserve male ego are just performing appropriate femininity. The double standards are everywhere, Sophia. Recognizing them does not make navigating them easier, but at least it clarifies that the problem is not you. The problem is a social structure that punishes women for being competent and successful. We talked for another 30 minutes, the conversation ranging across our respective experiences navigating technical careers, the specific challenges women faced in male-dominated industries, the personal costs of ambition that fell disproportionately on women. By the time we ended the call, I felt simultaneously more clear and more terrified about the decision I was facing. Rachel was right that I had been making myself smaller for years. She was right that the pattern had started even before marriage, and had deepened progressively as Marcus's need for me to play a supporting role became more central to his self-concept and career advancement. She was right that continuing that pattern would teach my children lessons I did not actually want them to learn about gender and ambition, and the appropriate relationship between professional identity and family responsibility. But acknowledging all of that did not make the decision less complicated or the potential consequences less frightening. Marcus returned home at 4:30. His expression showing exhaustion that suggested he had been processing intensely during his hours away. He found me in the kitchen starting dinner preparations, the domestic task providing something to do with my hands while my mind continued circling around impossible choices. "We need to talk," Marcus said without preamble. "I have been driving around thinking about everything that happened last night and this morning. I have some things I need to say." "Okay," I said, turning off the stove and giving him my full attention. "I am listening." "I have been angry at you for maintaining secret professional work," Marcus began, clearly having rehearsed these thoughts during his drive. "I felt betrayed that you were doing consulting for my company without telling me. But I have realized during the past few hours that my anger is misdirected. You were not hiding your work from me specifically. You were doing consulting projects that had confidentiality provisions standard for that kind of work." "I agree," I said, feeling sadness settle over me like a heavy blanket. "I think accepting this position probably means accepting that our marriage is going to end. And that feels devastating and sad and like a failure. But staying in a marriage that requires my ongoing diminishment also feels like failure, just a different kind. At least this failure involves choosing myself rather than abandoning myself." We stood in silence for several long moments, both of us processing what had just been acknowledged. Our marriage was probably ending. Not immediately, not through explosive conflict or dramatic betrayal, but slowly and painfully through the recognition that we had built our relationship on foundations that could not support both partners being fully themselves simultaneously. "I still love you," Marcus said finally. "That probably seems strange given what we just said about the marriage ending. But I do love you, Sophia. I just do not know if I can be married to you if you are fully yourself rather than the smaller version I have gotten accustomed to." "I love you too," I said, meaning it. "But I am starting to understand that love is not sufficient foundation for marriage. Marriages also require respect and partnership and willingness to celebrate each other's success, rather than feeling threatened by it. I think you love me, but I am not sure you respect me as an equal." And without that respect, love cannot sustain a functional partnership. Marcus nodded slowly, his expression showing acceptance of truth he probably wished was different. What do we do now? I call Robert Kendrick Monday morning and accept the senior vice president position, I said. You and I figure out how to navigate our marriage for whatever time it lasts. We prioritize Emma and James and make sure they are supported through whatever changes happen. We try to end things as gracefully as possible, if and when ending becomes necessary. We do the best we can with an impossibly difficult situation. Okay, Marcus said. That seems like a plan, even if it is a painful one. He left the kitchen, heading upstairs to his office or perhaps just to be alone with his thoughts. I returned to dinner preparations, my hands moving through familiar motions while my mind adjusted to the seismic shift that had just occurred. I was going to accept the position. I was going to step fully into my professional capabilities regardless of what that choice cost me personally. I was going to choose myself even though that choice would probably end my marriage. The decision felt right and terrifying simultaneously, exactly like every significant choice I had ever made. But at least this time I was choosing authenticity over accommodation, full presence over strategic invisibility, myself over the diminished version everyone else seemed more comfortable with. It was the hardest choice I had ever made. It was also, I was beginning to understand, the only choice that actually honored who I was and who I wanted to become. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that October sometimes delivers in Chicago, the air sharp enough to require a jacket but not yet cold enough to signal the brutal winter that would inevitably follow. I woke at 5:30, earlier than necessary but unable to remain in bed once consciousness arrived. Marcus slept beside me with the deep stillness of someone who had apparently found peace with decisions made over the weekend, or perhaps had simply exhausted himself through emotional processing and needed rest more than continued reflection. The house was silent as I moved through my morning routine. Shower, professional clothing selected with more care than usual, minimal makeup applied with attention to projecting competence, rather than conventional attractiveness. I was preparing not just for a day but for a transformation, the first morning of what would either be a new chapter in my professional life, or a catastrophic miscalculation that would cost me my marriage and destabilize my family. The uncertainty should have been paralyzing, but instead it felt clarifying, as though finally making a decision had released energy that indecision had been consuming. I had called Robert Kendrick's personal cell phone Sunday afternoon, reaching him directly as he had promised I could. The conversation had been brief and professional. I accepted the Senior Vice President of Technical Innovation position with the understanding that we would need to work through details about start date, reporting structure, and transition logistics over the coming week. Kendrick had expressed genuine pleasure at my acceptance, assuring me that quantum dynamics would provide whatever support and flexibility necessary to make the transition successful for both me and the company. We had scheduled a meeting for Monday morning at 8 o'clock in his office to begin formalizing arrangements. That meeting was now less than 3 hours away, and I was preparing for it with the same systematic attention I had once brought to graduate school examinations and technical presentations, recognizing that first impressions in this new role would establish patterns that would be difficult to modify later. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, reviewing notes I had compiled over the weekend about quantum dynamics' current strategic position, competitive challenges, and technical innovation opportunities one had identified through my years of consulting work. The company was well positioned in several market segments, but facing increasing pressure from both established aerospace competitors and newer entrants bringing disruptive technologies and business models. My role would involve identifying which technical innovations offered genuine competitive advantage versus which represented expensive distractions, then building organizational capacity to pursue high-value opportunities with appropriate speed and resource allocation. The challenge was substantial but not overwhelming. I had been analyzing these exact questions for 6 years through consulting projects. What would change now was not the intellectual work but the organizational authority and visibility that came with executive leadership. I would no longer be offering recommendations that other people could accept or ignore based on political considerations I could not influence. I would be making decisions, allocating resources, building teams, establishing priorities that would directly shape company trajectory. The transition from consultant to executive represented a fundamental shift in accountability and impact. Emma appeared in the kitchen at 6:30, earlier than her usual school morning rising time, her presence suggesting she had sensed tension in the household and was responding with the heightened awareness that children develop when parental dynamics become unstable. She poured herself orange juice and sat across from me at the table, her expression showing concern she was trying to present as casual interest. "You are dressed up," Emma observed. "Do you have something important today?" I closed my laptop and gave her my full attention, recognizing that this moment required honesty rather than protective evasion. Emma was 12, old enough to understand that adult lives involved complexity and change, young enough to need reassurance that changes affecting her parents would not necessarily destabilize her own security. "I have accepted a new job," I told her directly. "The reason I did not know about your professional activities is that I never asked. I never maintained curiosity about how you spent your time or what you were doing with your intellectual capabilities. I assumed you were content being a stay-at-home mother, and I never questioned that assumption because it was convenient for me to believe it." The acknowledgement was significant, evidence that he had been doing genuine reflection, rather than just cultivating grievances. "That is accurate," I said carefully. "I did not deliberately hide my work, but I also did not push past your lack of curiosity to make sure you knew about it. I was complicit in maintaining the fiction that I had fully stepped away from professional identity. I also realize that I have benefited enormously from your invisible contributions," Marcus continued. "Not just the consulting work you were doing for quantum dynamics, though that is obviously significant, but the strategic thinking you provided about my career decisions, the analysis you did of office politics and organizational dynamics, the support structure you maintained that allowed me to focus entirely on work without being distracted by domestic responsibilities. You were functioning as an unpaid consultant for my career while also managing our household. That was not fair or equitable, even if it seemed like a practical arrangement at the time." I felt tears threatening, emotion rising in response to hearing him finally articulate recognition that I had been waiting years to receive. "Thank you for acknowledging that," I managed. "But I also need to be honest about my limitations," Marcus said, his voice becoming strained. "I do not know if I can be married to someone who earns twice what I earn. I do not know if I can navigate the office politics of having my wife be a senior executive at my company. I do not know if I can restructure my self-concept to accommodate you being the ambitious career-focused spouse while I figure out how to be supportive. That feels like it requires becoming a completely different person than I understand myself to be." There it was, the honest acknowledgement of the fundamental problem. Marcus recognized intellectually that his assumptions about our marriage had been unfair and his treatment of me had been diminishing. But emotional recognition was different from intellectual acknowledgement. He understood theoretically that I deserved full professional engagement and appropriate recognition for my capabilities. But actually living with the implications of that recognition, having his wife be professionally superior, earning significantly more, operating at a higher organizational level, felt threatening to his core identity in ways he was not certain he could overcome. "I need to ask you something directly," I said, feeling my own clarity emerging. "If I decline the senior vice president position, if I continue doing consulting work part-time while maintaining primary responsibility for household and childcare, if I stay basically in the role I have been playing for the past decade, would you be relieved or disappointed?" Marcus's face showed struggle. "Honestly, part of me would be relieved. It would mean our lives continue basically as they have been. You supporting my career, me being the primary earner and the professionally visible spouse, our marriage structured around dynamics we both understand. That feels comfortable and safe." "And the other part of you?" I pressed. "The other part of me would be disappointed," Marcus admitted, "because it would mean you sacrificed your potential to preserve my comfort. It would mean I was the person who held you back, who could not celebrate your success, who needed you to be smaller so I could feel adequate. That is not who I want to be, Sophia. But I do not know if I can actually be the person I want to be when it comes to being married to someone more successful than me." The honesty was painful but valuable. At least we were finally having a genuine conversation about the actual dynamics at work rather than pretending the issues were simpler than they were, or could be resolved through good intentions alone. "I spoke with Rachel this afternoon," I said. "She pointed out that our children are watching how we model marriage and professional identity, and the relationship between individual ambition and family responsibility. Emma is forming her understanding of what women should sacrifice for relationships. James is forming his understanding of how men should respond to female achievement. What we do now will teach them lessons about gender and marriage and self-worth that will affect them for decades. What lessons do you want to teach them? Marcus asked. I want to teach Emma that women do not have to make themselves smaller to be loved, I said firmly. I want to teach her that her intelligence and capabilities are assets to be developed, not liabilities to be hidden. I want to teach her that good partners celebrate her success rather than requiring her diminishment. I want to teach James that women are competent and accomplished and deserving of respect and recognition. I want to teach him that male ego is not more important than female achievement, that good men support their partner's ambitions rather than feeling threatened by them. Those are good lessons, Marcus said quietly. I agree with all of that theoretically, but theory is easier than practice. Actually living those values when it means accepting that my wife is more successful than I am professionally, that is harder than just agreeing it should not be hard. We stood in the kitchen facing each other, two people who had built a life together slowly recognizing that building had been done on foundations that could not support the structure we needed going forward. The question was whether we were willing to demolish those foundations and rebuild something different, or whether the cost of reconstruction felt too high to attempt. I think I am going to accept the senior vice president position, I said, the words emerging with more certainty than I had felt before speaking them. Not because I want to hurt you or prove anything about who is more successful, but because declining it would mean continuing a pattern that has been slowly destroying my sense of self for years. I cannot keep making myself invisible to preserve your comfort, Marcus. I cannot keep teaching our children through my choices that women should sacrifice their potential for marriage. I cannot keep abandoning my own capabilities and ambitions to maintain relationship dynamics that apparently only function if I am playing a diminished version of myself. Marcus's expression showed pain, but also something that might have been relief, as though having the decision made, even if it was not the decision he would have chosen, at least provided clarity after hours of ambiguity. If you accept that position, he said slowly, I do not know if our marriage can survive. I want to believe I can adapt and celebrate your success and be the supportive spouse. But I honestly do not know if I have that capacity, and I think we should both be realistic about that rather than pretending it will definitely work out if we just try hard enough. I am going to be working full-time at Quantum Dynamics, the same company where your father works. I will be in a leadership role that involves significant responsibility and will require me to be at the office more than I have been over the past several years. Emma processed this information with visible concentration, her face showing the calculation children make when trying to determine what changes mean for their immediate circumstances. Does that mean you will not be home when I get back from school anymore? It means we will need to adjust our routines, I said carefully. I will still be here many days when you return from school, but there will also be days when I am at work, and you will need to manage your afternoon activities more independently than you have been. We will work out specific arrangements that make sure you have the support and supervision you need. Is this because of what happened at Dad's promotion party? Emma asked with the perceptiveness of someone who had been tracking household dynamics more carefully than adults sometimes credited. I heard you and Dad talking late Friday night. Not the words specifically, but the tone. It sounded like you were arguing about something serious. I considered how much detail to provide, ultimately deciding that age-appropriate honesty served her better than protective vagueness that would leave her filling gaps with imagination potentially more alarming than reality. Your father and I have been having some difficult conversations about how we structure our professional lives and family responsibilities. Those conversations are ongoing, and I cannot predict exactly where they will lead. But what I can tell you is that both of us love you and James very much, and whatever changes happen in our adult lives, that love is constant and not affected by our professional decisions or relationship dynamics. Are you getting divorced? Emma asked bluntly, her directness cutting through the careful language I had been deploying. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.